Dear all participants at the NATO Youth Summit, I'm really honored to be addressing you today, and I'm really glad that the summit is taking place this year as last year, and with a lot of participants also now. I'd like to take you back to October 2013, when I was participating in my first NATO Defense Ministerial. In October 2013, NATO had a guest at the table of the then Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. It was the Russian defense minister. He gave gifts. It was quite a good ambience around the table. And when we met again, just some few months later, in February 2014, the meeting took place at the same time as Russia annexed Crimea. And I say this just to remind us all that changes can come quickly, but they can also have profound impact. What we did in the 8 years that followed was to strengthen NATO as an alliance both of military and political nature. And I'm really happy to see that the work has paid off. Now NATO is an alliance that is fit for purpose. It is an alliance where members are putting a lot of emphasis on the unity and cohesion. And what we're seeing today is a NATO that is stronger than ever. And it is also really needed because the shifts around us are deep and profound. The consequences of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine is going to be felt for decades. There is no longer any talk of return to business as usual. This has had enormous impact not only for Ukraine, but for the whole European security architecture. We're also witnessing something that I think many of us didn't expect to happen this soon, and that is the debates in Sweden and Finland on NATO membership. It's been really interesting and rewarding to follow these discussions very closely. And I can say on behalf of Norway that we would welcome Sweden and Finland, our very good and solid neighbors that we already cooperate closely with, as full members of NATO. That would have an impact on regional security in the north. It would have an impact on European security and transatlantic security. And all the impacts it would have would be very, very good. So I'd like you to spend time wisely, both at the summit and also afterwards, to continue to discuss European security policy, to discuss how we can strengthen the transatlantic unity and bond between us. Your voices are extremely important in the debate on transforming NATO also in the future. This is something that we need to do together. And in the same way that allies have been stepping up, I think it is extremely important that young voices are heard in the discussions that we're going to have in the future. Thank you so much for participating, and best of luck with the summit.
Hey everybody, I'm Lieutenant General retired Ben Hodges. I was in the U.S. Army for almost 40 years. I first became a part of NATO and began to love NATO, our great alliance, back in 1981 when I was a brand new lieutenant serving in northern Germany during the height of the Cold War. At that time, this was the world that we all knew. And you had the nations of NATO. At that time, there were about 12 or 14 of us, including the United States and Canada. And on the other side, you had the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union. And this was a test of wills after the end of the Second World War. And it was a commitment by millions and millions of Americans and Europeans who cared about freedom and democracy. And we wanted to preserve that. But none of us, including the United States, had the capacity to do that alone. We needed allies. We needed other countries with whom we could had shared values. But also, when you add together the combined economies and populations and militaries of all the members of the alliance, it gave us a chance to send a message to potential adversaries. At that time, the Soviet Union: do not make the terrible mistake of attacking, because you will lose. And we will protect what we care about. So here we are today in 2022. Our alliance now has 30 members, and there are other nations in a queue wanting to join NATO. Why is that? Why, despite the fact that a coalition of 30 nations has well-known, well-documented challenges. There's frictions. Not every nation gets along with each other all the time, but at the end of the day, we are all bound by a commitment to come to the common defense of each other. And so that's why our alliance has grown from the original 12 up to 30. And there are several other nations that are in the queue wanting to join or else are seriously considering asking to join our alliance. Why is that? It's because they see that despite our challenges, despite the problems, that life inside the alliance is better than outside the alliance, that the protection, the security that comes from a shared commitment to each other's defense and bound together by shared values. That's why nations are in the queue. There's nobody knocking on the door of the Kremlin saying, please let me in. There's nobody knocking on the door of the Chinese Communist Party saying, please let us in. This is about democracy versus autocracy. And the alliance is what gives us the best chance to protect democracy in this contest. Now, every now and then you'll hear people say, NATO's outlived its usefulness. And now look what's happened in just the last few months. We've been reminded that Russia is a threat. And we've been reminded that China, the Chinese Communist Party, is not interested in stopping Russia. In fact, they look to take advantage of this. So we have real challenges out there. We need allies. That's why the American president made it a point on in his inaugural speech back on 20 January last year, the emphasis on rebuilding our relationships with all of our allies. I have seen our alliance adapt over the decades from its Cold War mission. And then at the end of the Cold War, we called it the peace dividend. And then we had for the first time in its history, NATO went outside of its boundaries to help implement the Dayton Peace Accords in 1995. This was called the I-4, Implementation Force. And this was a commitment by the United States and Canada and Europe, all the allies, to stop genocide, to help prevent a refugee disaster from taking place in the former Yugoslavia. It was very successful, and it showed that NATO can, in fact, help solve security problems even outside of its border, problems that would affect the security of all of its members. Now, again, we're not perfect. We've learned a lot. We learned a lot from our Afghanistan experience, and now we're facing a challenge from Russia. And I think the alliance, because of our capabilities, we're sure that Russia is not going to attack any member of NATO. Now we've got to figure out, have we deterred ourselves? How can NATO prevent a disaster from happening, from growing inside Ukraine that will affect all of us?